Welcome back for this week's video lesson. This week's lesson is actually a bit delayed. Last week was March break. For all of you that have kids here in Canada know exactly what that means. Kids running around, activities, making plans, interruptions of all sorts of different kind. But amidst all that chaos, I was able to find time to complete this portrait painting on the right. It was supposed to initially be just a study, but I liked it so much that I think this is one of the nicer portraits that I've done in a while. The intention for this week's video is to expand further on a lesson I did a few weeks back, that I'm showing there on the top right, on how to stylize for impact and drama. This doesn't only relate to portrait painting, which this is and that was, but just in general. So this initial stage I'm showing here of this portrait is very indicative of some of the videos I've already put out and the way I apply color. On this video I won't get into too much detail on that, but I am aware that a lot of the viewers here are brand new to my channel and are not familiar with my approach to color and how I apply it. So I thought if I do a few minutes showing some of the process of application of paint with this squeegee tool that I use a lot and that a lot of you are very familiar with at this point that are returning to my channel again. So I will talk a bit in this initial stage about that process, and then we'll get to the more of the intention of the video in a few minutes. So in this initial stage I've applied a rough dry scumbling drawing over a golden acrylic base. Okay, so I've done a few videos here already in the past on the impact of underpainting and how it plays a vital role for the overall design. I've chosen to do a golden, it's like a brass copper type of shiny acrylic underpainting, so that a lot of those shiny hues or dots will permeate and show through to the final painting. You can see the way that I'm applying paint here on top of that base brass acrylic paint is very meticulous, time consuming, in a sort of like a mosaic style. This is something that I've done for years, and it very much is in lockstep with regards to how I see color, with regards to temperature, values, edges, and so on and so forth. I will link a video down below. In fact, I'm showing a top right here that gets into much more detail of how I apply color. So if that is of interest to you, do consider watching that. Now on to what I consider the most important part of absolutely every painting, whether a portraiture like here, or landscape, or still life, and that is the idea. It is the conceptual idea you've got in your head prior to starting any work. So for this particular portrait, before touching the canvas, I've decided what feeling or story I want this portrait to convey, and how bold or how dramatic, soft, introspective, or abstract I want it to be prior to starting or before touching the canvas. So it is very important to know beforehand how to define, if you want to call it, mood and emotion. Oftentimes with students I find that they're very much influenced by the visual impacts in front of them. So if you're sitting in a classroom of sorts and you've got a model in front of you, or you've got a still life installation, it's difficult to sort of delineate from what's in front of you for a lot of people and start with an idea first, and not so much, is this line perfectly aligned with how the model looks, or is this drawing right? I'm not saying that that's not important. All those technical skills and ability to sort of communicate that on your canvas is very important, especially if you're doing portraiture. But knowing what direction you want to take it prior to starting is, in my opinion, much more important. So what does that mean for my example here, for this portrait? So you got to ask yourself, what is it that's drawing you to paint that particular scene? For this particular portrait, I was drawn to this girl's, obviously, the way she looks, but her gaze, the way that her demeanor is, her head is tilted downward, she's looking forward, and I liked some of the colors on her face. With portraiture, you'll find that that's usually the face, that is, the eyes, the face is the central focus. But it may not be. For some people, it's just the color. Some people, it's the shape of the body. For this particular thing, I wanted to accentuate and focus on her face. And of course, there's color involved. And of course, there's the gold that I talked about initially that's involved. That's in the base underpainting, but also on the top coat. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But her gaze is what drew me to this portrait initially. So for your own work, you can choose a signature element to stylize yourself. You can decide on one unique aspect to, if you want to call it, to push, to exaggerate. Brushwork. In this case, I've got thick impasto. I like impasto work. Her face is done with thick impasto. You can use unconventional color choices or abstracted edges for your own work. For me, I've talked about this in the past. You can see at the bottom right, I've got cold wax medium that I'm using for this portrait, for the whole portrait, even for her face, her hair, which I'm working on right now, and the background. But it doesn't need to be. So I'm using a medium to thicken the paint to create these impasto, bold, velvety strokes that a lot of you again are very familiar with, that I enjoy making, that create these organic marks on your canvas that surprise you a lot of times. For me, this process that I took with regards to this portrait is somewhat unconventional in that I painted her face basically to completion, not all the way, and then I worked everything else, sort of worked off of that. I wanted to have it be mostly completed and then see how everything will sort of play off of it, even though I had a general idea as to the direction I wanted to go and what's going to be more rendered and what's going to be less rendered. You still never know, and I didn't know for this particular portrait what color choices I was going to go with. I knew, however, that I wanted that base gold color that's going to permeate through, and also the top gold. But the process from finishing her face, which is, in my opinion, much easier than this process that I'm going through right now, which is the abstracted, the sort of mystical component of painting. And a lot of times tools help you with this. I talked about squeegee tool. Here I'm using a Brayer. Again, something that I'm very familiar with, and likely you are as well if you're subscribed to my channel. It puts these broad, swaths of color down. You can use it for that, like I am doing there in the background, or you can create thin lines or remove paint. Put paint on, remove paint. A lot of times I put these strokes down, or I draw with this tool. As you can see there, those lines that I'm making, a lot of times they surprise me, and they create these interesting, impactful lines and strokes that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with a brush. Having completed drawing her hair with that Brayer tool, which is falling kind of over her right shoulder, I'm now coming in, introducing some key color elements for this portrait, which are some of the blues in the background that are also falling over her shoulder, interestingly enough. And I'm introducing this red for her shirt, which is much more chromatic and is reflective of some of the colors in her cheek. It's much more chromatic than in the reference photo that I'm working off of. One of the concepts that I try to introduce and teach with the students that I work with is this idea of using the surface as a volume in motion and embracing the process and the form as a volume in relationship to the surface, and then of course the interaction of major shapes and the surface that it's on. I know some of these ideas may be over a lot of people's heads, but fundamentally what it teaches is how to plan for a strong value in shape design, thinking about node 10, so light and dark balance, and how your subject or subject's form, really if you're doing more figurative work, interacts with the background, as the background, which is usually the negative shape, is very, very important. I did a video a while back on this subject. I will link it down below in case you're interested, but it's probably a subject that's worth pursuing over a number of different videos, as it's extremely important. Now I'm coming in with this golden top. Now I have done one video way back in November when I started this YouTube journey with these two exact painting combinations as top coats. These are oil colors, by the way, and they're from Winsor & Newton. This particular shade is called Gold. I will link all of the information, not just for this paint, but all of my materials down below in case you want to resource or reference it yourself in the future. This is an oil gold that Winsor & Newton's put out, and I find that it really works well with these matte satin oil paints when they're mixed with cold wax. It really juxtaposes really well. Now on one side I've got the golden, which is just called gold. On the other side I've got, again, Winsor & Newton's called Renaissance Gold. It's much closer in tone and value to the background, the base gold acrylic that I put on, and it almost acts like a shade of the other gold when you look at it, but it shimmers, it shines. I wanted almost like a halo effect around this girl, because there was a certain innocence in her face, even though people have remarked that it's kind of worried. I don't know, it's just, there was a certain innocence that I wanted to accentuate with the gold around her head. Now this was something that was pre-planned prior to starting this portrait, and this is, again, goes back to that concept of having an idea from the beginning and then working off of that idea. I think for me, the beauty of painting, art in general, is this constant surprise that you encounter when you work intuitively like I do, relying greatly on the process and the surprises along the way and where they take you. Initially this was supposed to be a light portrait against a dark background, but I wanted it to be more impactful, so I added this white background, and that accentuated her face even more so, and then of course the gold as well, which popped out beautifully against that white background with the blues and reds shimmering alongside it. Let's see up close what we've created. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end and supporting the channel. Here I will link a video that goes much more into depth about that concept I talked about, the light and dark balance. And I will see you next week for hopefully another interesting lesson in painting. Thanks again. Bye bye.